Tourist dumped trash on Royal Guard, but 15 minutes later, he regretted it for the rest of his life. Part 1. Jack, a young American tourist, was visiting England with his college buddies on spring break. They decided to tour the historic Windsor Castle one sunny afternoon. As they approached the entrance, they saw the famous Royal Guards standing at attention in their bright red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Jack and his friends thought the expressionless guards looked almost statue-like. On a dare from his pals, Jack took the soda can he had just finished drinking from and balanced it on top of the guard's tall hat as they walked by, suppressing laughter. The guard remained completely still and did not react. Jack took a quick selfie in front of the guard with the soda can visible on his hat and rejoined his buddies, throwing his arms up in a victory pose. They all had a big laugh about it as they continued into the castle, not thinking much more about the silly prank. Part 2. Meanwhile, the guard, Henry, continued standing at attention, trying to ignore the uncomfortable weight and rattle of the soda can on his hat, unable to move a muscle to remove it or react in any way. He felt utterly humiliated to have trash dumped on him, but his strict training and sense of duty compelled him to remain completely stoic and motionless. Tourists pointing and laughing as they passed by only added to his embarrassment and inner turmoil. Part 3. Unbeknownst to Jack and his friends, the disrespectful act had been captured by several other tourists' phone cameras, as well as palace security cameras. By the time Jack and his buddies had finished their tour of the royal residence, videos of Jack balancing the can on the guard's hat and taking a selfie had been posted online and started going viral. An intense backlash quickly mounted on social media, with thousands of angry people around the world condemning the American tourist's crass act and demanding he be identified and punished. The fury only intensified as the videos spread further and further afield. Part 4. Oblivious to the spreading outrage, Jack and his college friends continued their spring break vacation in London, pub crawling, sightseeing, and goofing around. Jack noticed his phone battery was running low, so he switched it off to save power, not bothering to check social media or his messages. Part 5. With the palace video footage and selfie Jack had posted, online sleuths were quickly able to determine his identity. His name, photo, and social media profiles were plastered across the internet and on the news under headlines decrying the ugly American tourist. Strangers sent Jack hundreds of messages via social media and email cursing him and even threatening violence. His phone was inundated with calls and voicemails from unfamiliar numbers. Still unaware as his phone was off, Jack and his friends returned to their hotel late that evening, exhausted from the day's festivities. Turning on the room TV, they were stunned to see Jack's face under a breaking news banner about the soda can incident. Shocked, Jack turned his phone back on and watched it explode with angry notifications. Part 6. Suddenly, there was a loud pounding at the hotel room door. Heart racing, Jack opened it to find several London police officers who informed him that he needed to accompany them to the station immediately for questioning regarding his actions at Windsor Castle. As they escorted him sternly out of the hotel, Jack spotted more reporters outside shouting questions at him and snapping photos. He realized with dread that the prank had become an international incident and he was in serious trouble. Part 7. Down at the police station, Jack was severely reprimanded for his disrespectful actions towards the Royal Guard. Palace officials were demanding he be punished to the full extent of the law. Faced with potential jail time and a hefty fine, not to mention life-shattering worldwide notoriety as an ugly American, Jack broke down sobbing, consumed with regret and shame. Between tearful apologies, he tried to explain that he meant no harm and simply wasn't thinking, but he knew it was far too little, too late. The damage had been done. Even if he could avoid legal punishment, the public disgrace and societal consequences would haunt him for the rest of his life. As he contemplated his grim new reality, Jack desperately wished he could take the thoughtless act back, but knew he would be forever defined by this terrible lapse in judgment. After being released from police custody, a devastated Jack returned to his hotel room. His friends awkwardly tried to comfort him, but he was inconsolable, knowing his life would never be the same. He spent a sleepless night tormenting himself by reading the endless stream of furious online comments denouncing him. In the morning, there was a knock at the door. It was the hotel manager with a team of security guards. He informed Jack that the hotel was evicting him, as they didn't want to be associated with his scandal. Reporters swarmed as Jack and his friends hastily packed their bags and were escorted out a back entrance into a waiting taxi to the airport. At the airport, Jack discovered he had been placed on a no-fly list, pending further investigation. Stranded and alone, his friends continued on without him. With no choice, he found a small hotel in a quiet part of London and holed himself up in his room. Over the coming days, the news coverage intensified. Millions expressed outrage and revulsion at Jack's actions. Commentators debated the ugly American tourist stereotype. Sponsors pulled their ads from his social media. His job back home fired him. His girlfriend publicly dumped him, and his friends stopped returning his calls. Jack fell into a deep depression, deleting all of his social media and hiding from the world. He knew he would forever be publicly shamed as the thoughtless tourist who humiliated a royal guard for a prank. There was no escaping it. The story would always be just a Google search away. Part 3. Weeks later, after the furor had slightly died down, a still displaced Jack ventured cautiously out of his London hotel. Head down and shoulders slumped, he walked the city streets, trying to avoid eye contact with others. Spotting a small park, he took a seat on a bench, staring dejectedly at the ground. Suddenly, someone sat down next to him. Startled, Jack looked up to see an elderly gentleman in a tweed suit, who smiled kindly at him. "You look like you could use a friendly ear," the man said gently. "I'm Harold. What's troubling you, young man?" Surprised by the warmth in Harold's voice, Jack found himself pouring out the whole sordid tale, expressing deep remorse for his actions. Harold listened patiently, then put a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. "I was once a royal guard myself, many years ago," Harold revealed. "I know the feelings of humiliation when disrespected by thoughtless tourists. But I also learned the power of forgiveness and second chances." Harold shared hard-earned wisdom from his long life. He counseled Jack to make amends as best he could, learn from his mistake, work to become a better man, and most importantly, forgive himself. Moved to tears, Jack thanked Harold, feeling a ray of hope for the first time since the incident. Part 4. Jack resolved to make things right as much as possible. He wrote sincere apology letters to the royal guard and the palace, not asking for forgiveness, but taking full responsibility for his foolish actions. He volunteered at London charities for the remainder of his stay, trying to represent the best of American values. While much of the public outrage against him continued, some began to acknowledge his efforts to atone. Returning home to America, Jack knew he still had a long road ahead to rebuild his life and reputation. But he was committed to being a force for good and making the most of his second chance. He partnered with schools to speak to students about treating others with respect. He also raised money for charities that supported military veterans. Even as many continued to vilify him, Jack worked hard to demonstrate through his actions that one terrible mistake need not define a person forever. Slowly but surely, he began to change some hearts and minds. Years later, Jack returned to London a changed man. He visited Harold's bench, silently thanking the kindly gentleman for giving him hope during his darkest time. At the gates of Windsor Castle, as tourists posed for selfies with the notoriously stoic royal guards, Jack caught the eye of one of the guards and nodded respectfully, remembering how much pain his own unthinking actions had once caused. With a quiet smile, Jack continued on his way, determined to live his life with empathy and integrity. He knew he could never fully escape the shadow of his mistake, but he would continue trying to make amends and be the best version of himself, one day at a time. As the years passed, Jack continued his efforts to make amends and inspire others to be their best selves. He founded a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting cultural sensitivity, respect, and understanding. Through his foundation, he developed educational programs, organized volunteer trips, and partnered with schools and youth groups to spread his message far and wide. Jack's story of redemption began to overshadow his past mistake. Media outlets that had once condemned him now sought him out for interviews and speaking engagements. He was invited to share his experience at conferences and events around the globe. While some still criticized him, many more were inspired by his journey and his commitment to positive change. One day, Jack received a surprising letter in the mail. It was from Henry, the royal guard upon whom he had placed the soda can all those years ago. Henry had retired from his position and had been following Jack's story. In the letter, Henry expressed his forgiveness and his respect for the man Jack had become. He thanked Jack for his tireless efforts to right his wrong and make the world a little bit better. Moved to tears, Jack reached out to Henry and arranged to meet him in person. Over tea, the two men shared their experiences and found common ground in their shared belief in the power of kindness and second chances. They parted ways as unlikely friends, both forever changed by the incident that had brought them together. As Jack continued his work, he never forgot the lessons he had learned. He knew that one thoughtless action could have far-reaching consequences, but he also knew that it was never too late to make a change. He dedicated himself to being a force for good in the world, one small act of kindness at a time. Years turned into decades, and Jack's legacy grew. His foundation became a global force for positive change, impacting countless lives around the world. When Jack passed away at the age of 85, he was remembered not for his long-ago mistake, but for the incredible good he had done in the world. At his memorial service, people from all walks of life came to pay their respects. Among them was a familiar face, Henry, the former royal guard. With tears in his eyes, Henry spoke of the profound impact Jack had had on his life and the lives of so many others. He marveled at the ripple effect of Jack's journey, how one man's commitment to change had inspired countless others to be their best selves. As the service came to a close, Henry made his way to the front of the room. In his hands, he held a small, weathered soda can, the very same can that had once been placed upon his head. With a small smile, Henry placed the can gently on Jack's casket, a symbol of forgiveness, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Though Jack was gone, his legacy lived on. His story continued to inspire others to choose kindness, to treat others with respect, and to never give up on themselves or each other. And in the end, that was the greatest gift he could have ever given to the world. Years after Jack's passing, his incredible story of redemption continued to inspire people around the world. His nonprofit foundation, now run by his children and grandchildren, had grown into a global force for good, partnering with organizations and communities to promote understanding, respect, and kindness. One day, a young woman named Sarah stumbled upon Jack's story while researching a school project. She was deeply moved by his journey and felt a strong connection to his message. Sarah had recently made a mistake of her own. She had gotten into a heated argument with a classmate and said some hurtful things that she deeply regretted. Inspired by Jack's example, Sarah reached out to her classmate and apologized sincerely for her words. She took responsibility for her actions and expressed her desire to make things right. To her surprise, her classmate forgave her and thanked her for her honesty and courage. Encouraged by this experience, Sarah began to look for more ways to spread kindness and positivity in her community. She volunteered at local charities, organized fundraisers for important causes, and started a kindness club at her school. As Sarah's efforts gained momentum, she caught the attention of Jack's foundation. They reached out to her and invited her to speak at one of their events. Sarah was honored and humbled by the opportunity. At the event, Sarah shared her own story and spoke about how Jack's legacy had inspired her to be a better person. She encouraged the audience to look for ways to make a positive difference in their own lives and in the lives of others. After the event, Sarah was approached by an elderly man with a twinkle in his eye. It was Henry, the former royal guard who had played such an important role in Jack's story. Henry thanked Sarah for her words and expressed his admiration for her commitment to kindness. The two struck up a conversation and discovered that they lived in the same city. Henry invited Sarah to join him for tea sometime, and Sarah gladly accepted. Over the next few months, Sarah and Henry became close friends. They met regularly to chat, share stories, and discuss ways to make the world a little bit brighter. Henry shared his own experiences and offered Sarah gentle guidance and support. One day, over tea, Henry presented Sarah with a small, wrapped box. Inside was a weathered old soda can, the same can that had once been placed upon his head all those years ago. Henry explained that he had kept the can as a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the importance of second chances. He told Sarah that he believed she was destined for great things and that he wanted her to have the can as a symbol of her own journey. Sarah was deeply touched by the gesture and promised to treasure the can always. As the years passed, Sarah continued to follow in Jack's footsteps, spreading kindness and positivity wherever she went. She became a teacher and worked tirelessly to create a culture of empathy and respect in her classroom. When Henry passed away at the age of 97, Sarah was by his side. She held his hand and thanked him for his friendship, his wisdom, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of others. At Henry's memorial service, Sarah spoke about the incredible impact he had had on her life. She held up the old soda can and told the story of how it had come to symbolize the power of forgiveness, redemption, and the human spirit. As she spoke, Sarah could feel the presence of both Henry and Jack, smiling down on her from above. She knew that their legacies would live on through her and through all the lives they had touched. And so, the story that had begun with a thoughtless act of disrespect had come full circle, transformed into a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the infinite possibilities of redemption. Sarah knew that she would spend the rest of her life honoring that legacy, spreading kindness and compassion wherever she went, and inspiring others to do the same. And in that moment, holding that old soda can close to her heart, she knew that anything was possible if one only believed in the power of second chances. As Sarah continued her work as a teacher and kindness advocate, she began to notice a troubling trend among her students. Many of them seemed to be struggling with feelings of helplessness and despair, as if they didn't believe that their actions could make a real difference in the world. Determined to help, Sarah started a new initiative at her school called The Power of One. The program was designed to show students that even the smallest acts of kindness and compassion could have a ripple effect, inspiring others and creating positive change. As part of the program, Sarah shared Jack and Henry's story with her students. She told them about Jack's mistake, his journey to redemption, and the incredible impact he had had on the world. She showed them the old soda can and explained how it had become a symbol of forgiveness and second chances. The students were deeply moved by the story. Many of them shared their own experiences of making mistakes and feeling lost or hopeless. Sarah listened with empathy and encouraged them to believe in their own power to make things right. Over the next few weeks, Sarah watched in amazement as her students began to embody the spirit of the power of one. They started small, holding doors open for each other, offering kind words to classmates who seemed down, and picking up litter on the school grounds. But as they gained confidence, their efforts grew. They organized fundraisers for local charities, volunteered at animal shelters and nursing homes, and started a peer mentoring program to help younger students navigate the challenges of growing up. The impact of their actions was felt throughout the community. Other schools started similar programs, and local businesses and organizations got involved, donating resources and time to support the students' efforts. As the movement grew, Sarah began to receive invitations to speak at conferences and events around the country. She shared her students' stories and the lessons they had learned from Jack and Henry's legacy. One day, Sarah received a letter from a former student who had been deeply involved in the power of one during his time at her school. The student, now a successful businessman, wrote to thank Sarah for the impact she had had on his life. He shared that the lessons he had learned from Sarah and from Jack and Henry's story had stayed with him throughout his career. He had made it a priority to lead with kindness and compassion in all his dealings, and he had seen firsthand the incredible power of small acts of goodness. The student also included a generous donation to Sarah's school, earmarked for the Power of One program. He hoped that the funds would help to sustain and grow the initiative, ensuring that future generations of students would have the opportunity to learn the same valuable lessons. Sarah was overwhelmed with gratitude and pride. She knew that the work she and her students were doing was making a real difference in the world, one small act of kindness at a time. As she reflected on her own journey and the incredible people who had inspired her along the way, Sarah felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. She knew that she would spend the rest of her life continuing to spread the message of kindness, compassion, and the power of second chances. And she knew that somewhere, looking down on her with pride, were Jack and Henry, the two men who had started it all. Their legacy lived on, not just in Sarah and her students, but in every person who had been touched by their story and inspired to make a difference. Sarah looked out at her classroom, filled with eager young faces, and smiled. She knew that the future was in good hands, as long as there were people like her students who believed in the power of kindness and the resilience of the human spirit. And with that thought, she picked up the old soda can, now a cherished reminder of the incredible journey she had been on, and began to teach, ready to inspire a new generation of changemakers. Years turned into decades, and Sarah's Power of One program continued to thrive and grow. The ripple effect of kindness and compassion that had started with her students spread far beyond the walls of her school, touching lives in communities across the country and around the world. Sarah's former students, now adults with families and careers of their own, carried the lessons they had learned with them, passing them down to their own children and mentees. They started businesses with a focus on social responsibility, volunteered in their communities, and used their platforms to advocate for positive change. As Sarah approached the end of her long and fulfilling career in education, she began to reflect on the incredible journey she had been on. She thought about Jack and Henry, the two men whose stories had inspired her and set her on this path, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the legacy they had left behind. One day, as Sarah was going through some old papers in her office, she stumbled upon a letter that had been sent to her school many years earlier. It was from a woman named Elizabeth, who identified herself as Jack's granddaughter. In the letter, Elizabeth shared that she had recently come across some of her grandfather's old journals, in which he had written extensively about his experience with the soda can incident and the profound impact it had had on his life. Elizabeth wrote that reading her grandfather's words had given her a new appreciation for the incredible journey he had been on, and for the countless lives he had touched along the way. She thanked Sarah for carrying on his legacy and for inspiring so many others to follow in his footsteps. Sarah was deeply moved by the letter, and she knew that she had to meet Elizabeth in person. She reached out to her, and the two women arranged to have lunch together. Over the course of their conversation, Sarah and Elizabeth discovered that they had much in common. They shared stories about Jack and Henry, and about the ways in which their legacies had continued to inspire and shape their own lives. As they talked, Sarah had an idea. She asked Elizabeth if she would be willing to join her in creating a new initiative, one that would honor Jack and Henry's memory and ensure that their message of kindness, compassion, and second chances would continue to be shared with future generations. Elizabeth was thrilled by the idea, and together, she and Sarah founded the Jack and Henry Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting kindness, empathy, and understanding in schools and communities around the world. The foundation quickly gained momentum, partnering with educators, community leaders, and organizations to develop and implement programs that encouraged acts of kindness and promoted a culture of compassion. Sarah and Elizabeth worked tirelessly to spread the message of the foundation, speaking at conferences and events and sharing the stories of Jack and Henry with audiences of all ages. And as they watched the impact of their work grow and spread, they knew that they were not only honoring the legacy of two incredible men, but also creating a brighter, more compassionate future for generations to come. Years later, when Sarah and Elizabeth were old and gray, they sat together in Sarah's living room, reflecting on the incredible journey they had been on. They talked about the countless lives that have been touched by the Jack and Henry Foundation and about the ripple effect of kindness and compassion that continued to spread across the globe. And as they held the old soda can, now a symbol of the incredible power of second chances and the resilience of the human spirit, they knew that their work and the legacies of Jack and Henry would live on long after they were gone. For they had learned that the true power of kindness lies not in grand gestures or heroic acts, but in the small, everyday choices we make to treat others with empathy, respect, and compassion. And in that moment, surrounded by the love and gratitude of all those whose lives they had touched, Sarah and Elizabeth knew that they had truly made a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. As the years passed, the Jack and Henry Foundation continued to grow and flourish under the guidance of Sarah, Elizabeth, and a dedicated team of volunteers and supporters. The Foundation's programs and initiatives reached every corner of the globe, inspiring countless individuals to embrace kindness, compassion, and understanding in their daily lives. One of the Foundation's most impactful programs was the Kindness Ambassadors Initiative, which trained and empowered young people to become leaders in their communities, spreading the message of empathy and respect wherever they went. Among the many young people touched by this program was a boy named Ethan. Ethan had grown up in a rough neighborhood, surrounded by poverty, violence, and despair. He had always felt like an outsider, struggling to find his place in the world. But when Ethan joined the Kindness Ambassadors program, everything changed. Through the guidance and support of his mentors, including Sarah and Elizabeth themselves, Ethan discovered a sense of purpose and belonging that he had never known before. He threw himself into the program, learning everything he could about leadership, communication, and community building. He organized food drives and clothing donations, started a mentoring program for younger students, and even spoke at local schools and community events about the power of kindness and compassion. As Ethan's confidence and skills grew, so too did his impact on the world around him. He became a shining example of what one person, no matter their background or circumstances, could achieve when they dedicated themselves to making a positive difference. Years later, when Ethan was a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist in his own right, he returned to the Jack and Henry Foundation to thank Sarah and Elizabeth for the incredible impact they had had on his life. As he stood before a crowded room of volunteers and supporters, Ethan shared his story and the stories of countless others who had been touched by the Foundation's work. He spoke of the ripple effect of kindness and how every small act of compassion had the power to change lives and transform communities. And as Sarah and Elizabeth watched from the front row, their eyes shining with pride and gratitude, they knew that their legacy, and the legacies of Jack and Henry, would continue to live on through the countless individuals, like Ethan, who had been inspired to make a difference. For they had learned that the true power of kindness lies not in the recognition or accolades it brings, but in the quiet, everyday moments when we choose to treat others with empathy, respect, and compassion. And in that moment, surrounded by the love and gratitude of all those whose lives they had touched, Sarah and Elizabeth knew that they had truly made a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. As the event came to a close, Sarah and Elizabeth found themselves alone in the quiet of the empty room. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with the wisdom and understanding that comes only from a lifetime of service and compassion. And as they embraced, the old soda clasped tightly in their hands, they knew that their journey was not yet over. For as long as there were people in need of kindness and compassion, there would be work to be done. But they also knew that they had planted countless seeds of hope and love, seeds that would continue to grow and flourish long after they were gone. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and purpose, Sarah and Elizabeth stepped out into the world, ready to continue their mission of spreading kindness and compassion, one small act at a time. For they knew that, in the end, it was the small, everyday moments of grace and humanity that had the power to change the world. And they were determined to make every moment count, to leave behind a legacy of love and kindness that would endure for generations to come. And somewhere, looking down on them from above, Jack and Henry smiled, knowing that their story and their message would live on forever, carried forward by the countless lives they had touched and the countless acts of kindness they had inspired.